So it sounds like with Mike McKee en route, my role is to stall a little bit. So, now, as always, it's great to be and see another packed house for a Stuytown Peter Cooper Village Tenant Association meeting. It's not long ago we were here in the middle of a very heavy rainstorm and still filled every seat. I know actually a few people were turned away, unfortunately, that day. But today, I think it's fair to say that in a variety of ways, things are looking sunnier. Let me first acknowledge, Susan Steinberg mentioned our great Senator Tom Duane, who regularly attends these meetings. And I see Mike McKee has joined us. How about a hand for Mike McKee? Tom Duane is usually here, but today, Tuesday being Election Day, he is at this very moment working very hard to make sure that certain senators who really stand up for tenants are reelected, and perhaps even to replace a few who have not been so good on tenant issues. But he sends his regards and is certainly with us in spirit today. And I'm not really here to talk about the elections today, but just two announcements. One is, as you know, those of you who voted in the primary, we have new voting machines in New York. I chair a subcommittee of the Assembly on election operations and voting rights, and we know there have been tremendous issues with these machines, especially on primary day when there are a lot of problems in the way that the City Board of Elections rolled them out. But it's very important that we not be deterred from voting by that. And in particular, just to mention, there are on this ballot, in addition to some candidates, on the flip side of the ballot, you have an opportunity to vote on something that was taken away from you. The decision was taken away from you previously, which is term limits. And there is also another provision that will change the structure of city government. I'm not suggesting how anyone should vote on those, but do remember to flip your ballot over and exercise your right to express your opinion on those. The other thing is that, as you know, many of our state and federal offices are on the ballot this time, including my own seat and Tom Duane's and our great Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, who you'll hear from later. And one of the great strengths of this community is the tremendous rate at which people turn out to vote. It's very important in these fights. Susan mentioned that, we've been in contact with candidates for governor. It's very important that people continue to see this as a community that is politically active. So I'm not here to tell you how to vote, but please do go out and continue that strength and vote on Tuesday. Now, I've been asked to speak very briefly about the state legislative aspects of our situation. The Tenants Association and your elected officials have fought for many years to protect and strengthen the rent stabilization system, which was intended not only to keep rents in check, but also to protect tenants from landlord abuses. Many of you know the story here. Every few years, the system comes up for renewal, and the last few times it's come up for renewal, landlords have succeeded in substantially weakening that system. In many ways, that was the beginning of the problems that this community has faced. When the system changed so landlords could evict tenants when apartments became vacant or under so-called high-income decontrol, landlords, including ours, began to see huge profits in kicking people out and converting apartments to market rate. They exploited loopholes like the MCIs that Susan Steinberg mentioned, or major capital improvements. And they claimed again and again, particularly in this community, that long-term tenants did not really live here and should be evicted. Fortunately, this community has been successful in fighting back, but not without losing some of our neighbors along the way. And in recent years, the legislature has fought to reverse a lot of these changes, to close the loopholes and protect tenants. In the Assembly, we've passed bills that would make sure landlords can't overcharge through MCIs. We've passed the repeal of the Erstat law Susan mentioned, which would give control over rent regulation, would put it at the city level rather than the state level, where we think we'd get a much better deal for tenants. We have passed bills to repeal vacancy decontrol and to make sure the thresholds for high income control keep up with people's rising income and rising rents. This year we face the ultimate challenge, which is that the entire system, the entire rent stabilization system, will expire 7.5 months from now, on June 15th, 2011. If that happens, landlords throughout the city, including our own, will be able to charge you whatever they want when it's time to renew your lease. Rather than wait until next year to have that fight, I introduced a bill that would extend rent stabilization for several years and signed up dozens of my colleagues in the Assembly as sponsors. Now, in the mysterious ways of Albany, this bill eventually, very same bill, eventually became a bill sponsored by the Housing Committee chair of the Assembly, but we still managed to pass it in June, and it would extend rent stabilization through 2018. Like a lot of tenant-friendly legislation, however, it hasn't yet been taken up by the Senate. It is on the Senate floor, and again, our own state senator, Tom Duane, has been fighting very hard to get this done. But it is going to be a long, hard fight to get that done. Now, many of you who are market rate tenants until recently may not be as familiar with this fight. But you've heard me say this before. As of the Roberts decision, which you're going to hear a little bit more about from Alex Schmidt later, we are all in this together. Former market rate are now rent stabilized and now protected by the system. Moreover, there may be some of you, even people who've been fighting this fight for a long time, who may be beginning to wonder if this fight is really still yours. Perhaps it's over for you. Some of you, we know, are thinking about purchasing your apartment and ceasing to be renters. Others, as Susan Steinberg, are committed to continuing to rent, and everyone you see on this stage and everyone you hear from today is also committed to that goal. But for those of you who are considering purchasing, you might begin to think, rent regulation isn't really going to be for me anymore. Why do I care whether it gets extended past June or at any point? Here's what you need to know. If rent stabilization disappears or is severely weakened next June, not only will it make it exorbitant rent increases possible for rent-regulated tenants, but owners or investors in this complex are going to do exactly what they've done all the time, which is to assess the value of this property based on its present and future income potential. And if they do that, they are going to think twice about letting people buy their apartments at affordable prices. We know that the dream of big profits from deregulated apartments caused Tishman Speyer and their investors to bid $5.5 billion for this property in 2006. Without rent stabilization, the present and future owners would similarly inflate the value of the property and the price that they'd be willing to sell it for. So it's in everybody's interest in this community not to let that happen and to ensure affordability is preserved. We're truly all in this together. On that note, let me introduce our next speaker. Mike McKee certainly doesn't need much of an introduction to anyone who's been involved in the fight to protect tenants, or for that matter, anyone who's been to Stuytown Peter Cooper Tenant Association meetings in the past. He's one of the smartest, most tenacious, and most visible advocates for tenants in the state. And he's going to speak to you more about the importance of the legislative efforts. Without further ado, Mike McKee.
Good afternoon. Wow, it's bright. I'm used to the auditorium at the school where you can see everybody. My name is Michael McKee. I'm a tenant organizer. I am a board member of the Tenants Political Action Committee. I just want to point out we have 3 Stuytown Peter Cooper Village residents who are also on the board. Al Doyle is on the Tenants PAC board. John Marsh, your vice president, who I forgot was not going to be here. No wonder he didn't return my call. And Marina Metalios. Are you in the audience, Marina? Yes. And what we do is we work to elect pro-tenant candidates, and we work to defeat pro-landlord candidates. And I just want to crow for a second. We had a wonderful victory a few weeks ago when we helped take Pedro Espada down in the Democratic primary. We not only got rid of a landlord stooge, or landlord mouthpiece, basically, we elected a real progressive, Gustavo Rivera, who is also a rent-stabilized tenant and who has said many times he could not afford to live in the Bronx if he did not have a rent-stabilized apartment. And he's going to be a strong fighter for us in the Senate. So we're hopefully changing the equation in the Senate that will make it possible to actually pass some bills. I want to start out by just saying that I think it is a crying shame, and I think it needs to be said, that some greedy people were able to do so much damage, almost fatal damage, to what is a crown jewel of affordable housing in New York City, Stuyvesant Town and Peter Cooper Village. And, I think, MetLife and Tishman Speyer and all of their partners, all of these speculators deserve a lot of blame for this. And I think it's also important to remember that Mike Bloomberg helped them. I'm going to talk about three things, and I'll try to be brief. I'm going to talk about the election coming up in a few days and what's at stake for us. I'm going to talk about the legislation, and as Brian mentioned, the big fight that we're facing in the coming legislative session, when all of the tenant protection laws are up for renewal and therefore are at risk. And I want to talk about co-op conversion. I am going to be passing out a flyer in a little while urging people to volunteer to get involved in the next few days to help the Democrats keep the majority in the state Senate and hopefully expand the majority. And you know what? Let's remember, it's not that the Democrats are so great. There are Democrats and there are Democrats. There are Democrats like Pedro Espada. It's that the Republicans are hopeless. They are owned. They are literally owned by the real estate lobby. And there is a very serious threat, a very real danger that the Republicans could recapture the majority in the state Senate on Tuesday. And if they do, if they have the majority even by one vote, we are in serious trouble next year. First of all, you can forget about any improvements in the laws. And we would be at real risk at having to fight real hard to prevent them from taking back things like, for example, reversing the Roberts decision. And I can guarantee you that is on the real estate wish list for next June. And what they do is every time the laws come up for renewal, they expire. They call this a sunset, just like the sun goes down at night. If the laws are not renewed, they cease to exist. And it's not that the threat is so much that the laws will not be renewed. The threat is that as the price of another renewal, we will be forced to swallow another round of weakening pro-landlord amendments. And at the top of their list is to reverse the Roberts decision of last fall. And for those of you who are former market rate tenants, and I know that there's still a lot of issues that have not been resolved, like what is your stabilized rent, for example, will you or will you not get any kind of refund or rollback? But you are now rent stabilized. That's the law. You are rent stabilized. You have rights that you did not have when you moved into those market rate apartments. For one thing, you have the right to renew your lease and limits on how much your rent can go up in the future. But if they undo the Roberts decision as an amendment to the renewal of the laws next year, you could find yourself deregulated overnight. So there's a lot at stake, and that's why I'm asking people to volunteer. Now, it just so happens that the phone bank that is going to be operating tomorrow, Sunday, from 11 a.m. until 9 p.m., and again on Monday from 5 to 9 p.m., and then all day on Tuesday starting at 9 in the morning and going till 9 at night, is right here at 204 East 23rd Street. And I'm going to be passing out a flyer, and Marina will help me, that will tell you how to sign up, where to go, and who to call or who to email to sign up. Phone banking is really not that difficult, and it is very effective. It's calling up voters and explaining to them why it's important for them to vote for a particular candidate. In our case, we phone tenants who live in targeted districts and say, you know, it's very important that you vote for so-and-so if you want to make sure that we keep our rent laws on.